He came home just before dawn, shirt-wrinkled phone still glowing with unread messages from another woman. The house was silent, too silent. On the dining table sat a thin stack of papers perfectly aligned, waiting. Ethan Perry smirked, already rehearsing his excuses, already certain of his power. Tori Perry didn't ask where he'd been. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She simply sat there, calm, composed, as if she had been expecting this moment all night. "That's cute," Ethan scoffed, flipping through the pages. "You think you can leave me?" Then he froze. His signature was already there. And beside the documents lay a sealed black envelope he didn't remember signing for. For the first time, the confidence drained from his face. Before we dive into the full story, take a second to comment where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if you enjoy powerful stories of justice, revenge, and quiet strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss what happens next. Tori Perry used to measure her life in milestones, graduation dates, promotions, the first apartment she paid for, entirely on her own. Back then, she believed progress was something you could chart, something that moved forward if you worked hard enough and stayed disciplined. Marriage changed that math. When she met Ethan Perry, he admired her ambition, or at least that's what he said. He liked telling people she was driven, liked introducing her as the woman who could outwork anyone in the room. At first, it felt like partnership. Two careers moving in parallel. Two adults choosing each other, not depending on each other. But parallel lines, she learned, don't always stay that way. The shift was subtle. It always is. It started with suggestions. "You don't need to stress yourself like that anymore. I can handle the finances, focus on us. Why exhaust yourself when I'm already providing?" Tori didn't hear control at first. She heard care. She heard relief. She heard permission to rest. So she stepped back. One project turned into two declined offers. Two became a pattern. And slowly, without any dramatic announcement, her world shrank to fit inside Ethan's schedule. The house, the dinners, the appearances. Ethan's career surged. Promotions came fast, then faster. With each one, his confidence hardened into something sharper. He spoke more, listened less. Decisions stopped being discussed and started being delivered. Tori noticed when her name disappeared from accounts. When we quietly became I. When questions about money were met with sighs instead of answers. "It's complicated," Ethan would say. "You wouldn't want to deal with this. Trust me." And she did. For a while. Because trusting him was easier than admitting she was being erased. By the time she realized how invisible she had become, it felt too late to protest without seeming ungrateful. Too late to reclaim space without being accused of disruption. She learned the rhythm of silence, when to speak, when not to, when to nod. From the outside, it looked like comfort, stability, a woman who didn't have to worry. From the inside, it felt like standing still while the world moved on without her. The first sign of betrayal didn't come as a confrontation. It came as absence. Ethan began coming home later. His phone stopped resting face up on the table. He smiled at messages he didn't share, laughed at jokes that had nothing to do with her. When she asked about his day, his answers shortened. When she spoke about hers, his attention drifted. Once she caught the faint scent of perfume on his jacket, sweet, unfamiliar, deliberate. She said nothing. Not because she didn't notice, but because she did. Silence, she was learning, could be a form of observation. The nights stretched. Work trips multiplied. Excuses stacked neatly on top of one another. Ethan didn't bother to hide his impatience anymore when she asked questions. He spoke to her like someone explaining something obvious to a child. "You're imagining things," he said once, not even looking up. "You have too much time to overthink." That was when it clicked. Not the affair itself. The disrespect. Ethan no longer feared losing her. And men like Ethan only stopped pretending when they believed the outcome was guaranteed. Tori began to see herself the way he saw her, dependent, static, replaceable. And that realization didn't break her. It clarified her. She paid closer attention. to the way he spoke on the phone when he thought she wasn't listening, to the names he didn't say, to the pattern of his lies, how they followed convenience, not logic. She remembered who she had been before the quiet, before the shrinking, before the belief that love required disappearance. At night, lying beside him as he slept, she stared at the ceiling and counted breaths not as hers. Proof that she still existed, that she still had agency even if she hadn't used it in years. Ethan mistook her calm for resignation. That was his first real mistake. Because Tori wasn't numb, she wasn't defeated, she wasn't blind. She was awake. And while Ethan moved through the world convinced he was untouchable, Tori began preparing for a future that did not include him at the center of it. She didn't confront him. She didn't demand answers. She didn't change her behavior enough to alert him. She watched. She listened. And she remembered everything. The night Ethan finally stopped pretending arrived without ceremony. He texted her just after 7. "Working late, don't wait up." Tori read the message once, then set the phone face down on the counter. The house was already quiet, the kind of quiet that made sounds feel deliberate. The hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, her own breathing, as she stood still longer than necessary. She cooked dinner anyway, not because she believed he'd come home, but because routine gave her something solid to hold on to. By the time she finished eating, the food had gone cold on his plate. She wrapped it, placed it in the refrigerator, and washed the dishes slowly, methodically, as if each movement were a small act of control. At 10, she received another message. Meeting ran long. No apology, no explanation. Tori sat on the couch with a book she wasn't reading, eyes scanning the same paragraph again and again. She wasn't anxious. She wasn't angry. She felt strangely clear, like someone watching a storm approach from behind glass. At 11:30, the sound of laughter drifted through the phone she hadn't touched. A notification buzzed, muted but persistent. She picked it up without urgency. The message wasn't meant for her. A photo preview flashed across the screen before it disappeared. A woman's shoulder, bare skin. A familiar background she recognized instantly, the rooftop bar downtown Ethan had once taken her to for their anniversary. Tori didn't open the message. She didn't need to. Midnight passed. 1 o'clock followed. She turned off the lights, climbed into bed, and left her side empty. When she finally slept, it was light and shallow, the kind that breaks easily. The door opened just before 3. Ethan moved through the house with careless confidence, the kind that belonged to someone who no longer worried about consequences. He kicked off his shoes near the entryway instead of lining them up the way he used to. His jacket landed on a chair, missing the back by inches. Tori kept her eyes closed. Not because she was pretending to sleep, but because watching him would have felt like participation. He showered longer than usual. When he slipped into bed, the mattress dipped with unfamiliar weight. He smelled like alcohol and something else. Something floral, expensive, intentional. She stayed still. "Hey," he murmured, not softly enough to be sincere. She didn't respond. He exhaled, already irritated. Long night, still nothing. He turned away from her phone, lighting up the room for a split second. She caught a glimpse of a smile, reflected faintly in the dark, before he rolled onto his side. In the morning, he acted as if nothing had happened. That more than the affair itself felt like the betrayal. He poured coffee. He checked his phone. He asked if she had any plans for the day, his tone neutral, distracted. "You should go out," he said casually. "Get some fresh air." As if her presence inconvenienced him. Tori nodded. Maybe. He didn't look at her when he left. The next few weeks followed the same pattern, only sharper. Less effort, less patience. Ethan stopped lying convincingly because he no longer needed to. His absences grew longer. His stories grew thinner. And slowly, deliberately, he began to push. It showed in the way he spoke to her, short, dismissive, transactional. In the way he corrected her in front of others. In the way he stopped pretending her opinions mattered. One evening, she asked him directly, her voice calm. "Are you seeing someone else?" He laughed. "Not kindly. You're being dramatic," he said. You really need something to occupy your time." The words landed exactly where he intended them to. Tori lowered her gaze not in defeat, but in recognition. This was who he was when he believed he held all the leverage. From that moment on, she stopped asking questions. Instead, she paid attention to details. To the second phone, he didn't think she noticed. To the way he angled his screen away from her. To the names that never appeared, only initials, emojis, blank spaces. She memorized his schedule not to track him, but to understand him. Patterns revealed priorities. Priorities revealed truth. One afternoon, while folding laundry, she found a receipt tucked into his jacket pocket. Hotel bar, 2 drinks, charged to his personal card. A timestamp that didn't match any meeting he'd mentioned. She placed the receipt back exactly where it had been. That night, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror and studied her reflection. She looked the same. No visible cracks, no outward signs of collapse. Good, she thought. Ethan mistook her composure for ignorance. Madison Cole's name surfaced for the first time when Ethan stopped bothering to be careful. "She's just someone from work," he said offhandedly one evening, scrolling through his phone. "You wouldn't like her." The implication was clear. Younger, louder, more convenient. Tori absorbed the name without reaction. Madison. That was all she needed. Ethan's arrogance grew with each passing day. He began coming home later on, purpose-testing boundaries that no longer existed. He criticized the house, the food, the quiet. He spoke to her like someone who had already replaced her in his mind. And through it all, Tori remained composed. Because she understood something Ethan didn't. Men like him only felt powerful when someone reacted. So she gave him nothing. Behind the silence, something else was forming. Not rage, not grief, resolve. She started waking earlier, reading more, making calls he didn't hear, thinking in steps instead of emotions. She didn't need answers anymore. She had clarity. The affair wasn't a secret to uncover. It was a weakness to be used. One night, as Ethan slept beside her phone, buzzing quietly with messages he didn't bother to silence, Tori reached a decision so firm it surprised even her. She would not confront him. She would not beg him. She would not warn him. She would let him believe he was winning. And when the moment came, she would make sure the ending was something he never saw coming. The humiliation didn't arrive all at once. It crept in, slowly disguised as practicality dressed up as reason. It happened on a Thursday evening, the kind of night that carried no warning. Ethan came home earlier than usual, tossing his keys onto the counter with a sharp clatter that cut through the quiet. Tori was in the kitchen, rinsing vegetables, sleeves rolled up, movements unhurried. "We need to talk," he said. She turned off the faucet and faced him, drying her hands calmly. Okay. That alone seemed to irritate him. He leaned back against the counter, arms crossed, studying her the way someone evaluates a problem they believe they've already solved. "I've been thinking," he began. "This arrangement, it's not working anymore." Tori waited. "I'm carrying everything," he continued. "Bills, mortgage, responsibilities. And you're just here." The word lingered between them, heavy with implication. She nodded once, neither agreeing nor arguing. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a credit card. He slid it across the counter toward her, the plastic scraping softly against the surface. "Take this," he said. "Use it for groceries basics. From now on, I'm not funding anything else." Tori looked down at the card, then back up at him. "You're cutting me off," she asked, her voice level. He scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. I'm setting boundaries. You need to learn how the real world works." There it was. Not concern, not fairness, power. "You've had it easy for a long time," Ethan went on. "And honestly, you wouldn't survive without me. Someone has to be realistic." Tori felt the words register one by one, not as wounds, but as data points. This was the moment he stopped pretending to respect her, the moment he decided dominance was safer than decency. She picked up the card, turning it between her fingers. "So this is how you see me?" He shrugged. It's how things are. For a brief second, he watched her closely, perhaps expecting tears. A raised voice. A plea. She gave him none of it. "Okay," she said simply. The relief on his face was immediate and telling. He straightened, confidence returning. "Good. I knew you'd understand." That night he didn't sleep at home. He texted just before midnight. "Don't wait up." Tori didn't respond. She sat alone at the dining table long after the lights outside had gone dark, the credit card resting in front of her like a misplaced symbol of ownership. The silence felt different now. Heavier, clearer. This wasn't neglect anymore. This was a declaration. The next morning, she tested the card. Declined. She wasn't surprised. When Ethan came home that evening, she mentioned it casually. The card didn't work. He barely glanced at her. "I must have forgotten to update the limit. I'll fix it later." Later never came. Days passed. Then a week. Groceries became calculations. Small expenses turned into careful choices. Ethan noticed, but only enough to criticize. "You're overthinking everything he said when she mentioned running low on essentials. You don't need that when she replaced something basic. Stop acting helpless when she asked a question." Madison Cole's presence became impossible to ignore. Ethan stopped hiding the calls. He took them in the open now, pacing the living room, voice lowered, but not enough. He smiled more, laughed more, came home less. Once, as he dressed for yet another late meeting, he caught Tori watching him from the doorway. What he asked, irritation flashing across his face. She shook her head. Nothing. He studied her, suspicious. "You've been quiet." She met his gaze evenly. "I always am." That answer unsettled him. A few nights later, the humiliation sharpened. They were at a small dinner with his colleagues. Tori sat beside him, polite, composed, nearly invisible. When someone asked what she did, Ethan answered for her. "She doesn't work," he said lightly. "She used to, but priorities change." The table laughed politely. Tori smiled. Under the table, her hands remained steady. On the drive home, Ethan didn't speak. He seemed pleased, energized, even as though publicly diminishing her had fed something inside him. That was the night Tori made her decision permanent, not emotional, not impulsive, strategic. She didn't cry when she was alone. She didn't rage. She didn't imagine confrontations or speeches. She opened her laptop and began organizing information. Dates, transactions, patterns. She found documents she hadn't looked at in years, accounts still bearing her name, agreements made before marriage, evidence of choices she had paused, not erased. Ethan had underestimated something fundamental. He thought dependence erased history. It didn't. It only delayed it. The following week, Ethan came home. In a mood she recognized immediately, impatient, restless, careless. He tossed his phone onto the couch and loosened his tie. "We should probably talk about the future," he said. Tori looked up from her book. "What about it?" He hesitated, then smirked. "I think it's time we're honest. This marriage, it's run its course." There it was. He expected panic, shock, fear. Instead, she closed the book slowly and met his eyes. "If that's what you want," she said. The confidence in her voice caught him off guard. He narrowed his gaze. "You're taking this well." "I've had time to think," she replied. He smiled, reassured. "Good, because I don't want this to get ugly." Tori nodded. "Neither do I." That night, while Ethan slept soundly, convinced the outcome was already decided. Tori stood in the doorway of the bedroom and looked at him one last time, not with sadness, but with clarity. He believed the power dynamic was fixed. He believed she had nowhere to go. He believed silence meant surrender. And that belief would cost him everything. Ethan believed certainty was the same thing as control. Once he decided the marriage was over, he moved through the house like a man already free. He hummed while getting dressed. He left doors ajar. He stopped pretending his phone wasn't an extension of someone else's hand. In his mind, the story had reached its conclusion. Tori would leave quietly or stay diminished until the paperwork made it official. What he didn't know was that Tori had already stepped into a different chapter. It began with a folder she retrieved from the back of the closet, buried beneath coats she no longer wore. Inside were documents she hadn't needed in years, contracts, certifications, correspondence from a former life Ethan barely acknowledged. She sat at the dining table and went through them one by one, not with nostalgia but with precision. This wasn't about who she used to be. It was about what still existed. 2 days later, she made a phone call Ethan never heard. Daniel Wright answered on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said, voice calm, unsurprised. Tori closed the door to the guest room behind her. "I need to understand my position." There was a pause, not hesitation, but assessment. "Then you're ready." They met the following afternoon in an office that smelled faintly of paper and polished wood. Daniel Wright was exactly as she remembered. Measured, observant, the kind of man who spoke only when it mattered. He didn't offer sympathy. He didn't ask her how she was holding up. He asked for facts. "How long has the affair been going on? When did you stop having access to joint accounts? Has he threatened you financially?" Tori answered each question without embellishment. Dates, actions, words. When she finished, Daniel leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "He thinks you have nothing," he said, not as an insult, as a diagnosis. "Yes," Tori replied. "That's intentional." A corner of his mouth lifted. "Good." He laid out the reality calmly. The prenup Ethan referenced so often, the one he believed gave him immunity, had never been filed correctly. Certain assets Ethan assumed were exclusively his weren't. Others he had moved without transparency. And then there was the affair, documented, ongoing, careless. "He's been sloppy," Daniel said. "Men get sloppy when they think they're untouchable." Tori absorbed every word. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "Patience," Daniel replied. And silence. That she could do. At home, she continued as before. She cooked, she cleaned, she listened. She did nothing that might alert Ethan to the shift beneath the surface. When he criticized, she didn't react. When he dismissed her, she didn't push back. He mistook her restraint for fear. One evening, he tossed a stack of papers onto the table. "These are the preliminary divorce terms," he said. "You should look them over." She glanced at the documents without touching them. "Okay." "That's it?" he asked, frowning. "No questions. I trust you've considered what's fair," she replied. The sarcasm flew past him unnoticed. Days later, Madison Cole appeared in their lives without pretense. Ethan didn't bring her home, not yet, but he stopped denying her existence. He took calls in front of Tori now, voice low but intimate. He left early on weekends. He returned with an ease that spoke of replacement, not regret. Madison was younger, louder, impressed by the version of Ethan that needed an audience. Tori saw her once by accident, or perhaps by design. They crossed paths at a cafe downtown. Madison laughed too brightly, leaning across the table toward Ethan, her hand resting where it didn't belong. When Ethan noticed Tori standing there, the surprise on his face lasted only a second. "Tori," he said, as if she were the interruption. Madison turned eyes sharp with curiosity. Assessment, triumph. Ethan gestured vaguely. "This is Madison. No title, no context." Tori met Madison's gaze evenly. "Nice to meet you." Madison smiled a little too confidently. "I've heard a lot about you." "I'm sure," Tori replied. Ethan cleared his throat. "We were just enjoy your coffee," Tori said, already stepping back. She walked away without looking behind her. She didn't need to. The encounter confirmed what she already knew. Madison wasn't the threat. Ethan's arrogance was. That night, Daniel sent her a message. "We're ready when you are." Tori replied with a single word. "Proceed." From that moment on, everything moved quietly, efficiently. Documents were filed, evidence organized, timelines constructed. Daniel handled the legal mechanisms with a surgical precision, while Tori handled herself. Ethan began pushing harder. "You're taking this too calmly," he said one evening, suspicion flickering behind his eyes. "Most women would be losing it by now." I'm not most women, she replied. He laughed uneasy. You think you're stronger than this? I know I am. He watched her for a long moment, then shook his head. You really don't get it. When this is over, you'll have nothing. Tori didn't correct him, because she understood something he didn't. Power wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It waited. The night the divorce papers were finalized for filing, Tori sat alone in the living room, lights off, city glow filtering through the windows. She felt no triumph, no fear, only readiness. Ethan was asleep upstairs, confident in his narrative, unaware that the ground beneath him had already shifted. Tomorrow, he would walk into his day, believing he held all the leverage. Tomorrow, that belief would begin to collapse. And Tori Perry, silent, observant, underestimated, would finally stop playing the role he assigned her. Not with fury, not with desperation, but with certainty. Preparation didn't look dramatic from the outside. There were no late-night breakdowns, no frantic phone calls, no sudden changes in routine. If anything, Tori Perry became easier to overlook. Quieter, more agreeable. She learned to ask fewer questions, and to answer Ethan's with just enough warmth to keep him comfortable. Comfort bred carelessness. Ethan began leaving his phone unattended. Not for long, but long enough. He stopped locking his laptop when he stepped away. He assumed privacy was a privilege she no longer knew how to demand. He was wrong. Tori didn't rush. She didn't dig recklessly. She waited for moments that offered themselves naturally, as if by coincidence. When Ethan showered, when he took a call outside, when he fell asleep with his phone still glowing on the nightstand. She didn't read messages for meaning. She cataloged them for pattern. Times, dates, repetition. Madison Cole's name appeared more often now, sometimes spelled out, sometimes shortened, sometimes disguised behind a heart emoji or a single letter. Hotels replaced offices. Weekends replaced workdays. Lies replaced effort. Tori wrote everything down. Not emotionally, not angrily, precisely. She took photos when necessary, screenshots when possible, receipts when available. Each piece alone meant little. Together, they formed a story Ethan would never be able to rewrite. At the same time, she began reclaiming pieces of herself he didn't monitor. A forgotten email account, a dormant professional profile, a certification that never expired. She updated quietly, reconnected selectively. One conversation at a time. No announcements, no declarations. She wasn't rebuilding her life. She was restoring it. Ethan, meanwhile, grew bolder. He started coming home late on purpose, as if daring her to object. He criticized the house more openly, complained about things he'd never noticed before. The quiet that once irritated him now seemed to amuse him. You don't talk much anymore, he said one night, loosening his tie. It's actually kind of peaceful. Tori smiled faintly. I didn't realize noise was required. He laughed, missing the edge beneath her words. You're finally learning. Learning, yes. Just not what he thought. Madison's influence crept further into the open. Ethan stopped deleting her name from his calendar. He answered her calls, even when Tori was in the room. He began dressing differently, sharper, younger, as though proximity to someone new had reset his self-image. Once he came home, smelling unmistakably of her perfume. Tori didn't comment. That unsettled him more than confrontation ever could have. You don't care anymore, do you? He asked one evening, half joking, half testing. She looked up from her book. I care about what matters. He stared at her, searching for something: anger, jealousy, fear. He found none. Behind the scenes, Daniel Wright worked efficiently. He requested financial statements Ethan assumed were unimportant. Cross-referenced accounts Ethan believed were private. Flagged inconsistencies Ethan never thought to hide. This is textbook, Daniel said during one of their brief calls. He's overconfident. That always leaves a trail. Tori listened, asked questions, followed instructions. Silence remained her greatest asset. One afternoon, Ethan announced he'd be gone all weekend. Conference, he said casually, not meeting her eyes. Of course, Tori replied. As soon as the door closed behind him, she moved. Not frantically, not emotionally, purposefully. She accessed the shared filing cabinet Ethan never touched, retrieved old tax returns, loan agreements, paperwork he hadn't bothered to update because he assumed no one would look. She scanned everything. By Sunday night, she had built a timeline that told a very different story than the one Ethan liked to tell himself. When he returned relaxed and smiling, she greeted him as usual. "How was it?" she asked. "Productive," he said, tossing his bag aside. She nodded. "That's good." He studied her for a moment, suspicion flickering again. "You're being nice. I'm being myself." He didn't know what to do with that answer. The following week, Ethan crossed another line. They were at a small gathering, his friends, his colleagues. Madison wasn't there, but her presence hovered in the way he spoke, the confidence he carried. Someone asked Ethan how the divorce was going. He didn't look at Tori when he answered. "It'll be quick," he said. "There's not much to divide." Laughter followed. Awkward, complicit. Tori lifted her glass and took a slow sip, her hand steady. Later that night, as they drove home, Ethan glanced at her. "You didn't say anything back there." "There was nothing to correct," she replied. He frowned. "You're really okay with all this, yes?" That word again. Calm, absolute. He nodded, reassured. "Good. I hate unnecessary drama." So do I, Tori thought. By the time Ethan began pushing for her to sign preliminary agreements, everything was already in motion. Documents were prepared, evidence organized, strategies mapped. All that remained was timing. Daniel was clear. Let him think he's leading this. Tori understood. Men like Ethan didn't need to be challenged. They needed to be allowed to walk confidently into their own undoing. The night before Ethan planned to officially file for divorce, he slept soundly convinced the narrative was his to control. Tori lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, feeling neither fear nor regret. Only clarity. She wasn't waiting for justice to save her. She was preparing to deliver it. Ethan chose the moment the way he chose everything else, when it was most convenient for him. It was a Monday evening, early enough to feel deliberate. He came home with documents tucked under his arm, confidence pressed into every step. Tori was in the living room, laptop open, posture relaxed. She looked up when he entered, as if nothing about the air had changed. "We should get this over with," he said, dropping the folder onto the coffee table. Tori closed her laptop slowly. "Get what over with?" "This," he replied, tapping the papers. "The divorce." There it was, clean, clinical, as if it were a business decision already approved. He sat across from her, legs crossed, adopting the tone of someone who believed he was being generous. "I've already talked to my attorney. This doesn't need to be complicated." She didn't interrupt. "I'll keep the house," he continued. "It's in my name anyway. You won't have to worry about bills for a little while. I'll give you a small settlement, enough to get started." "Started where?" she asked. He smiled thinly. "Wherever you end up." The dismissal was intentional. He wanted her to feel small. "You'll sign," he said, sliding the papers toward her. "It's better this way. Clean break. No drama." Tori picked up the folder and flipped through it. The terms were exactly what she expected. Restrictive, lopsided, designed to look reasonable on the surface, while stripping her of everything beneath. "You've already decided," she said. "Of course I have," Ethan replied. "Someone has to." She looked up at him, then meeting his eyes fully. For a brief second, something unreadable passed through her expression. "If this is what you want," she said calmly, "I won't fight you." The relief on his face was instant and complete. "I knew you'd see reason," he said, leaning back. "This doesn't have to be ugly." She nodded. "No, it doesn't." He pushed a pen toward her. "Go ahead," Tori signed. Not hesitantly, not emotionally, decisively. Ethan watched her closely as she wrote her name, searching for hesitation that never came. When she finished, she placed the pen neatly back on the table. "That was easier than I expected," he said, suspicion flickering briefly before pride smothered it. "You're handling this better than most." She folded her hands in her lap. I've had time to think. He gathered the papers, already imagining the next steps. Good. I'll file these tomorrow. Okay. That word again. Simple, non-threatening. Ethan stood energized now, already moving past her in his mind. I'll be staying out tonight. Tori didn't ask where. She didn't need to. After he left, the house settled into its familiar silence. Tori remained seated for several minutes, breathing evenly, allowing the moment to pass fully through her. She hadn't just signed papers. She had signed the opening move. Daniel Wright's response came within the hour. Received. Exactly as expected. She closed her eyes briefly, then reopened them. No relief, no triumph, just focus. The next few days unfolded precisely as Ethan predicted, at least on the surface. He told Madison the divorce was handled. He told his friends it was amicable. He told himself he was in control. Madison celebrated prematurely. "You're finally free," she said one night, clinking her glass against his. He smiled, basking in the admiration. "It was inevitable." She laughed. She didn't even put up a fight, no. Ethan replied, satisfied. She knew better. At home, Tori continued her routine. Packed meals, quiet mornings, polite distance. She didn't rush to move out. She didn't ask for clarity. Ethan mistook her patience for dependence. "You can take some time," he said one evening almost kindly. "Figure out what you want to do." "I already know," she replied. He raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" "Yes." The certainty in her voice unsettled him, but he brushed it off. What Ethan didn't realize was that signing those papers hadn't ended anything. It had activated everything. Behind the scenes, Daniel moved quickly. The filed documents triggered disclosures Ethan hadn't prepared for. Requests he assumed were formalities suddenly demanded precision. Accounts he thought were invisible were now illuminated. Ethan's attorney assured him it was routine. "Just paperwork," he said. "You're fine." Ethan believed him, because believing was easier than looking closely. A week later, Ethan received the court notice. He skimmed it, frowning. "This is unnecessary," he muttered. "Why are they requesting financial reviews?" Tori, seated across the room, looked up from her book. "Is something wrong?" He waved it off. "No, just standard procedure." She nodded. "That's good." He watched her again, unease flickering. "You're really not upset about this, are you?" She closed the book. "I'm at peace with it." That answer didn't sit right with him. But peace didn't look dangerous. Confidence did. Ethan's arrogance deepened with every day that passed without resistance. He began talking openly about the future with Madison, with friends, even with Tori. "I'll probably move closer to the city," he said casually one morning. "Fresh start. Sounds nice." Tori replied. He smiled, reassured again. The day before the first court review, Ethan packed an overnight bag, humming to himself. Madison was waiting. Celebration plans were already made. "I'll be late," he said. "Don't stay up, I won't," Tori replied. After he left, she stood alone in the doorway, listening to the echo of his footsteps fade. This was the moment he believed he had won. This was the moment he stopped paying attention. Tori returned to the living room and opened her laptop. One message waited for her. "Tomorrow changes everything, Daniel." She closed the screen gently. Ethan thought divorce was the end of the story. For Tori, it was only the beginning. Ethan's mistake wasn't a single decision. It was a pattern, small dismissals stacked so neatly he mistook them for certainty. The first sign came the morning after he filed the paperwork. He skimmed the court notice again this time, slower irritation tightening his jaw. Requests for disclosure, financial affidavits, documentation spanning years. "Overkill," he muttered. Tori was in the kitchen pouring coffee. "What is?" she asked lightly. "They want everything," he said, waving the notice. "Counts, transfers, assets. It's ridiculous." She took a sip. "Isn't that normal?" he scoffed. "Only if someone's trying to make trouble." She met his eyes calm. "Are they?" "No," he said too quickly. "Of course not. That was mistake number one, assuming transparency was a threat only to the guilty." Ethan's second mistake was believing his charm worked on systems the way it worked on people. He treated deadlines like suggestions, forms like formalities. When his attorney asked for older records, Ethan brushed it off. "They don't need that," he said. "I'll give them what matters." What matters to whom the attorney asked. To the outcome, Ethan replied. He didn't notice the hesitation on the other end of the line. At home, Tori watched the rhythm of his confidence. It had a tempo now fast, careless, buoyed by a sense of inevitability. He joked more. He slept better. He talked about the future as if it were already secured. "You'll be fine," he told her one afternoon, almost magnanimous. "I made sure you'll have enough to get by." She smiled faintly. "I appreciate your concern." He nodded, satisfied. Mistake number 3, believing appreciation was submission. Behind the scenes, Daniel Wright assembled the record with quiet precision. He didn't rush Ethan. He didn't challenge him. He let the omissions speak for themselves. "This is where it turns," Daniel said during one of their brief calls. "He's answering selectively." Tori listened. "What happens next, we let him." The court requested clarification on several discrepancies. Transfers without documentation, accounts that appeared disappeared, reappeared under different names. Ethan skimmed the notice and frowned. "They're fishing," he said aloud, "trying to scare me." Tori looked up from the couch. "Are you worried?" "No," he said, then paused. No, it's just annoying." He spent that evening combing through files, growing increasingly frustrated as he realized how much he had never bothered to organize. He cursed under his breath, blamed his accountant, blamed the system. He never once blamed himself. The real mistake. The fatal one came 2 days later. Ethan decided to simplify. He consolidated documents, reframed timelines, presented a version of events that felt cleaner, easier to explain. He omitted details he deemed irrelevant. He signed off on statements he assumed no one would question. He didn't realize he had just contradicted himself. Daniel noticed immediately. "He's rewritten history," he told Tori. "And he's done it sloppily." Tori felt no satisfaction, only readiness. On the morning of the preliminary review, Ethan dressed with unusual care. Crisp shirt, confident posture. He glanced at Tori as he adjusted his cufflinks. "You don't have to come," he said. "This is procedural." "I want to," she replied. Something flickered in his expression. "Suit yourself." The courthouse was colder than Tori expected, not in temperature and atmosphere. Voices echoed. Shoes clicked against polished floors. Ethan walked ahead of her, greeting his attorney with an easy smile. Tori followed, composed, observant. When the clerk called the case, Ethan straightened confidence firmly in place. The judge reviewed the documents, silently flipping pages with measured focus. "Mr. Perry," the judge said at last, "I have some questions regarding your disclosures." Ethan smiled. "Of course." The questions came calmly, methodically, each one built on the last. "Can you explain this transfer? Why does this account appear here but not here? Why does this date differ from your affidavit?" Ethan answered quickly at first, then slower. His smile thinned. His attorney leaned closer, whispering urgently. Across the room, Tori sat still, hands folded, eyes forward. Daniel waited. The judge paused, studying the file. "Mrs. Perry," she said, "your counsel has submitted supplementary documentation." Ethan turned sharply. "Supplementary?" Daniel stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Records corroborating inconsistencies in Mr. Perry's statements." Ethan's pulse spiked. "That's not," the judge raised a hand. "Mr. Perry, you will have an opportunity to respond." One by one, the documents appeared on the screen, clear, time-stamped, aligned. Ethan felt the room tilt. "That can't be right," he said. "Those accounts, those were..." "Please answer the question," the judge replied. He couldn't, because the mistake wasn't a missing document. It was a lie that couldn't survive daylight. When the session ended, Ethan's attorney pulled him aside, voice low and urgent. "You didn't disclose everything. I didn't need to." Ethan snapped. "You do now." Ethan glanced toward Tori. She was speaking quietly with Daniel, her posture relaxed, her expression unreadable. You knew about this, Ethan demanded, later cornering her near the exit. She met his gaze evenly. You told me it was procedural. His voice dropped. Did you do this on purpose? I answered what I was asked. She replied. That wasn't the answer he wanted. Outside, the city moved on, as if nothing had happened. Cars passed. People laughed. Ethan stood on the steps, suddenly aware of how exposed he felt. Madison texted him. How did it go? He didn't reply. For the first time since this began, Ethan felt something unfamiliar, uncertainty. That night, he paced the living room, replaying the hearing in his mind. He searched for the moment it went wrong and kept landing on the same realization. He had underestimated her. You played me, he said, finally stopping in front of Tori. She looked up from the table. No. He clenched his jaw. You let me think I let you speak, she said calmly. There's a difference. Silence stretched between them, taut and revealing. Ethan exhaled sharply. This isn't over. No, Tori agreed. It isn't. But the balance had shifted. Ethan had believed control meant speed, confidence, force. He was learning too late that control meant accuracy. And accuracy was on Tori's side. The first full court hearing didn't feel dramatic at first. It felt procedural, quiet, restrained, almost deceptively calm. Ethan mistook that calm for safety. He arrived early, confidence carefully reconstructed, suit-pressed expression neutral. He told himself the preliminary review had been a fluke, a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by overzealous paperwork. Systems made mistakes. Judges corrected them. Control would return. Tori arrived separately, accompanied by Daniel Wright. She wore nothing remarkable, simple, professional, unassuming. If anyone in the hallway noticed her, they didn't look twice. That too worked in her favor. When the judge entered the room, settled into attentive silence. The case was called. Names spoken. Formalities observed. Ethan leaned back slightly, hands folded, as if this were a meeting he planned to dominate through presence alone. The judge began without preamble. Mr. Perry, since our last review, further discrepancies have been identified. Ethan's jaw tightened. Your Honor, I believe those concerns were addressed. Daniel rose smoothly. With respect, they were not. The judge nodded. Proceed. The screen illuminated again this time, with timelines clean, chronological, undeniable. Transfers that contradicted sworn statements, expenses tied directly to hotel stays, payments overlapping with dates Ethan claimed to be elsewhere. Ethan's attorney shifted uncomfortably. This suggests deliberate omission, the judge said evenly. Ethan leaned forward. That's not fair. I didn't think those details were relevant. The judge looked at him steadily. Relevance is not determined by convenience, Mr. Perry. Tori felt the words land in the room like weight. Daniel continued. Additionally, Your Honor, we request the court consider evidence of marital misconduct that materially impacted shared finances. Ethan stiffened. That's unnecessary. Is it? The judge asked. The first message appeared on the screen. Then another. Then photographs carefully redacted, professionally presented. No dramatics, just facts. Ethan's breath grew shallow. Madison Cole's name surfaced for the first time in an official record. The judge paused, reviewing the materials. Mr. Perry, she said you stated under oath that no third party benefited from marital assets. Ethan swallowed. I please answer yes or no? Silence stretched. No, he said finally. The word echoed louder than he expected. Across the room, Tori sat still. Her face revealed nothing. Not satisfaction, not pain, only composure. Madison, seated behind Ethan, froze. She hadn't expected this. She had imagined court as formality, not exposure. She shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting, suddenly aware that the narrative she'd believed in was unraveling. Ethan felt it too. The room had turned. By the time the judge called for a recess, Ethan's confidence was gone, replaced by something raw and frantic. His attorney pulled him aside immediately, voice low, urgent. You didn't tell me about half of this, the attorney hissed. I didn't think. That's the problem, the attorney snapped. Thinking doesn't replace disclosure. Ethan glanced across the room at Tori. She was standing with Daniel, listening quietly, her posture relaxed. She didn't look at him. That hurt more than anger would have. When the hearing resumed, the tone shifted. The judge addressed both parties evenly, but the message was unmistakable. Given the inconsistencies presented, the court orders a full forensic review of financial records and temporarily freezes contested assets pending further determination. Ethan's head snapped up. Freezes. Yes, the judge said, effective immediately. Madison inhaled sharply. Ethan's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, he had no argument ready. The gavel struck. Session adjourned. Outside the courtroom, chaos erupted. Madison grabbed Ethan's arm. "What does that mean you said this was handled?" "It is," Ethan snapped, yanking his arm free. "Just give me a minute." She stared at him, doubt flooding her expression. "You didn't tell me about any of this." "I didn't need to," he said too sharply. Her eyes narrowed. "Did you lie to me?" He didn't answer. Across the hall, Daniel handed Tori a folder. That went exactly where it needed to. Tori nodded. "What happens now?" Now Daniel said, "We wait, and let the truth finish its work." Ethan watched them from a distance, chest-tight thoughts racing. The certainty he'd clung to was gone. In its place stood questions he hadn't prepared for. How much did she know? How long had she known it? And how had he missed it? That night he didn't go to Madison's place. He returned home. Tori was in the living room reading. He stopped in front of her, the silence between them charged. "You set me up," he said quietly. She turned a page. "No. You let me think I was winning." She looked up, then her gaze steady. "You never asked if you were." He scoffed. "You enjoyed this." "I prepared for it," she corrected. "There's a difference." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration bleeding into fear. "This is getting out of control." "It's getting accurate," she replied. The word cut deeper than any insult. He lowered his voice. "We can fix this. Together." She closed the book and stood meeting his eyes fully for the first time that night. "That option passed when you decided I was nothing." Silence filled the room. Ethan searched her face for softness, for hesitation. There was none. The next morning, Madison didn't answer his calls. By evening, rumors began circulating, whispers among colleagues, questions he couldn't deflect. A messy divorce, financial issues, court scrutiny. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the ground beneath him shift without warning. Tori, meanwhile, slept peacefully. Because the courtroom hadn't been the victory. It had been the confirmation. The story, Ethan told himself, was collapsing under its own weight. And this time, there would be no rewriting it. Numbers, Tori learned, had a way of speaking when people finally stopped interrupting them. The forensic review didn't arrive with drama. It arrived with spreadsheets, timestamps, and a quiet authority that no charm could bend. While Ethan scrambled to reassure his attorney, to calm Madison, to stabilize a narrative already cracking, the auditors worked methodically, indifferent to excuses. Tori watched the process unfold from a distance Daniel had deliberately created for her. "Let them do the talking," he advised. "The less emotion, the stronger the facts." She followed that guidance precisely. Days passed, then weeks. Ethan's frustration became visible in his posture and the way he snapped at small inconveniences and the sleepless shadows beneath his eyes. The asset freeze hit harder than he expected. Cards declined. Transfers stalled. Calls returned slower than usual. Control, his favorite illusion, slipped through his fingers, one inconvenience at a time. One evening, he came home furious. They're digging into everything he said, pacing the living room. Transactions from years ago. Things that don't even matter. Tori looked up from her laptop. "If they don't matter, why are you worried?" He stopped pacing. "I'm not worried." The lie sounded thin even to him. Madison's absence made everything worse. She had stopped answering his messages, consistently responding only with vague reassurances when she did. "This is getting intense," she texted. "I didn't sign up for court drama." Ethan stared at the screen, jaw clenched. Neither did I, he thought, but the thought rang hollow. He had signed up for something else entirely. He just hadn't expected consequences to follow him into daylight. The first formal report arrived on a Thursday morning. Daniel called Tori immediately. They found commingling, he said, significant amounts. Tori closed her eyes briefly. Explain. Marital funds used for personal expenditures tied directly to the affair. Hotels, travel, gifts, all documented. She absorbed the information calmly. What does that mean? It shifts leverage. Daniel replied, decisively. When Ethan received the same report hours later, his reaction was very different. This is absurd, he snapped at his attorney. Those were personal expenses. They were paid with joint assets. The attorney replied, that's the issue. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. So what, they're going to punish me for living my life? They're going to hold you accountable for misrepresentation, the attorney said, and potentially bad faith. The words landed like a blow. Bad faith meant intent. It meant credibility lost. It meant the court was no longer neutral, at home. Ethan confronted Tori with a desperation he tried and failed to hide. Did you know about this? He demanded, waving the report. She glanced at the pages, then back at him. The spending, the audit, he said sharply. I knew the court ordered one, she replied. You were there. He exhaled hard. You're enjoying this? No, she said. I'm letting the process work. That process is destroying me. She met his gaze steadily. You destroyed the trust first. He stared at her, something like fear flickering behind his anger. You could help me. She shook her head once. I won't interfere. For God's sake, Tori, he said, lowering his voice. This could get ugly. It already is, she replied quietly. Just not for me. The next hearing was nothing like the first. This time, the judge spoke plainly. The forensic review indicates repeated misrepresentation of marital assets, she said. Additionally, expenditures benefiting a third party were drawn directly from shared funds. Ethan's attorney attempted to mitigate, to contextualize, to soften. The judge wasn't interested. Given these findings, she continued the court revises its preliminary position. Tori felt Daniel shift beside her, not in surprise, but in readiness. Mrs. Perry, the judge said, turning to her, your position regarding asset division will be reconsidered accordingly. Ethan felt the floor drop away. Your Honor, he began. The judge raised a hand. Mr. Perry, you have had ample opportunity to be forthcoming. The sentence didn't need to be finished. Outside the courtroom, Ethan finally broke. This wasn't supposed to happen, he said hoarsely, leaning against the wall. Daniel passed by without acknowledging him. Tori paused only briefly. You assumed fairness was automatic, she said. It isn't. Madison didn't wait for the final ruling. She called Ethan that night, her voice strained. I can't be involved in this anymore. What does that mean, he asked. It means this is too much, she said. The money issues the court. It's not what you promised. He laughed bitterly. So that's it. She hesitated. I need space. The line went dead. Ethan stared at his phone, the silence roaring. The following days brought more revelations. Hidden liabilities, risk exposure, professional consequences he hadn't anticipated. His employer requested clarification. His reputation, once polished, began to dull under scrutiny. At night, he lay awake, replaying conversations, searching for the moment he lost control. He always landed on the same realization. He never saw Tori coming. She, meanwhile, felt something unexpected relief. Not because Ethan was falling, but because the truth no longer required her to carry it alone. Daniel reviewed the final numbers with her in his office. This is the turning point, he said. From here, outcomes follow evidence. She nodded. I'm ready. He studied her for a moment. You've handled this with remarkable restraint. She smiled faintly. Restraint isn't weakness. The final report was submitted the next morning. It told a story Ethan could no longer interrupt. And for the first time since the divorce began, Tori felt something settle deep in her chest. Not triumph, not revenge. Alignment. The facts were finally aligned with reality, and reality she knew was on her side. The unraveling didn't happen in a single blow. It happened in layers, each one stripping away something Ethan had relied on to feel secure. The prenup was supposed to be his shield. He had referenced it casually for years, like an unbreakable rule of nature. Whenever money came up, whenever Tori asked questions, whenever discomfort threatened his authority, he would mention it with a smirk. Everything's protected, he'd say. That's the point. Daniel dismantled that certainty in less than 10 minutes. They were in the conference room when he laid it out quietly, without drama, as if discussing something routine. The prenup was never properly executed, Daniel said, sliding a document across the table. No court filing, no independent counsel verification on your end. And several clauses are unenforceable due to commingling and misrepresentation. Ethan's attorney stiffened. That can't be right. Daniel didn't argue. He handed over the evidence. Signatures without witnesses, dates that didn't align, assets that invalidated protections Ethan assumed were permanent. Tori watched Ethan's face change, not explosively, but internally. The confidence drained first, then the color, then the posture. "So what are you saying?" Ethan asked, finally, voice tight. Daniel met his gaze evenly. "I'm saying the prenup doesn't protect you the way you think it does." Silence swallowed the room. Ethan laughed, once sharp and hollow. "You're bluffing." Daniel shook his head. "I don't bluff." The next hearing confirmed it. The judge reviewed the prenup with clinical detachment, then set it aside. Given the procedural defects and subsequent conduct, this agreement cannot be upheld as presented. Ethan felt something inside him snap. Madison, seated behind him, froze. "That's not fair," Ethan said louder than he intended. The judge didn't look up. Fairness isn't the issue. Validity is. Tori remained still, hands folded, breathing steady. She didn't look at Ethan. She didn't need to. The collapse was happening in full view. Madison's confidence evaporated in real time. The woman who had once leaned into Ethan's arm now sat rigid eyes, darting, absorbing the implications she hadn't bothered to understand before. After the session, she confronted him in the hallway. "You told me she'd walk away with nothing," Madison hissed. Ethan turned on her. "This isn't the time." "When is she?" snapped. "My name is in those documents now. My gifts, the trips. I look like part of the problem." "You are not the problem," he said, but the words lacked conviction. Her eyes searched his face. "Are you sure?" That night, Madison packed her things. She didn't make a scene. She didn't leave a note. She simply vanished from the story the way she had entered it, conveniently quietly, without accountability. Ethan noticed the absence immediately. He stood in the living room, staring at his phone, scrolling through unanswered messages, disbelief curdling into anger. "You used me," he muttered aloud, though he couldn't say to whom. The next blow came from a direction he hadn't considered. His employer requested a meeting, just to clarify some things they said. Clarification turned into questions. Questions turned into concern. Concern turned into distance. Nothing formal, nothing explicit. But the tone changed. At home, the air felt different, smaller, colder. Ethan began watching Tori with a mix of suspicion and resentment. Every calm response felt calculated. Every silence felt like judgment. "You planned this," he accused, one night pacing. "I prepared," she replied evenly. "That's the same thing." "No," she said. "Planning implies intent to harm. Preparation implies intent to survive." He scoffed. "You're enjoying watching me fall." She looked at him then, not with anger, not with satisfaction. With clarity, she said, "I'm watching consequences." The next court date sealed what was already inevitable. The judge addressed the room with unmistakable authority. Given the invalidity of the prenuptial agreement, the established financial misconduct, and the pattern of non-disclosure, the court finds in favor of equitable redistribution. Ethan's attorney closed his eyes. Ethan's chest tightened. "You can't," the gavel struck. He barely heard the rest. Outside, his mother, Margaret Perry, waited. She had remained silent throughout the proceedings, observing without comment, refusing to take sides publicly. But when Ethan approached her, shaken, desperate for reassurance, she didn't offer it. "You should have been honest," she said quietly. "Mom." "You treated her like she was disposable," Margaret continued. "You assumed silence meant weakness." Ethan swallowed hard. "You don't understand." She looked past him toward Tori, standing a few steps away. "I understand exactly." That was when it hit him. He had lost more than money. He had lost credibility, respect, the narrative he'd built his identity on. Later that night, Ethan knocked on Tori's door. She opened it calmly. "I need to talk," he said, voice low, stripped of arrogance. She stepped aside, allowing him in. He looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time, the order, the quiet, the stability he had mistaken for absence. "I never thought it would go this far," he admitted. "That's because you never thought about consequences," she replied. He hesitated. "We can still fix this." She met his eyes, steady and unyielding. There is nothing left to fix. The finality in her voice left no room for negotiation. Ethan stood there, exposed, stripped of every assumption that had protected him. For the first time, he understood what he had lost. Not power, perspective. And Tori Perry, once dismissed, once underestimated, stood firmly in her own. Silent, unmoved, unbreakable. Ethan's collapse didn't come with shouting or spectacle. It came quietly, the way all irreversible things do, when there was no one left to convince and nowhere left to hide. The night after the court ruling, he sat alone in the living room, lights-off suit jacket still draped over the chair where he'd dropped it hours earlier. His phone lay face down on the table. He hadn't checked it in a while. There was no one left who might call with reassurance. Upstairs, Tori moved through the bedroom with calm efficiency, packing the last of what she intended to take. She didn't rush. There was no urgency left in her body. Everything that needed to be decided already had been. Ethan finally stood and climbed the stairs slowly, as if each step required permission. He stopped at the doorway. "Tori," he said. She looked up. Yes, the word was neutral. Open, not inviting. "I don't know how this happened," he said. His voice cracked, not dramatically, but honestly. "I don't recognize my own life anymore." She folded a sweater and placed it into the suitcase. That happens when denial runs out. He swallowed. "I never meant to hurt you." She paused, then met his gaze. Intent doesn't erase impact. Silence filled the room. Ethan stepped inside, careful, tentative, as though entering unfamiliar territory. "I was under pressure," he continued. "Everything was moving so fast. I thought I had control." "You confuse control with entitlement," Tori replied. He flinched but didn't argue. "I can make this right," he said. "I'll cooperate. I'll fix whatever's left." She closed the suitcase zipper. "This isn't about fixing anymore." "What is it about then?" he asked, desperation rising. She straightened, meeting him eye to eye, ending it cleanly. That word cleanly hit him harder than anger would have. He shook his head. "You're walking away like none of this mattered." "I'm walking away because it mattered," she said, "and because staying would mean forgetting myself again." He exhaled sharply. "You don't even hate me." "No," she replied. "I don't." The admission unsettled him more than rage ever could have. "Then why does this feel like punishment?" he asked. "Because accountability feels like punishment when you've never had to face it," she said. The next morning, Margaret Perry arrived without warning. She knocked softly, waited, then stepped inside when Tori opened the door. "I won't stay long," Margaret said, her tone reserved. "That's fine," Tori replied. They sat at the kitchen table, sunlight filtering in through the window. Margaret folded her hands, eyes focused, measured. "I owe you an apology," she said. Tori remained silent, allowing the moment its weight. "I saw the signs," Margaret continued. "I chose not to interfere. I told myself it wasn't my place." Tori nodded. "That's common." Margaret looked up. "It shouldn't be." She sighed. "My son believed power excused behavior." I didn't challenge that belief soon enough. Tori met her gaze gently. That was his choice to make. Yes, Margaret agreed. And now he's making another one, slowly. She stood, hesitated, then added, "You handled this with more dignity than he deserved." Tori didn't respond to that. She didn't need to. Ethan returned that evening, eyes rimmed, red movements unsteady. "My attorney says I should try to settle," he said quietly. "That would be wise," Tori replied. "I'll agree to the terms," he added. "Whatever the court decides." She studied him for a moment. Not with suspicion, with clarity. Do it because it's right, not because you're cornered. He nodded, shame settling in. Over the next few days, Ethan complied with every request. Documents arrived on time. Statements were corrected. Transfers were authorized. The resistance that once defined him evaporated, replaced by exhaustion. The man who had once smirked at divorce papers now moved through the world, cautiously uncertain where he stood. At the final mediation session, he barely spoke. Daniel handled the logistics. The numbers were laid out plainly. Redistribution, restitution, closure. When the mediator asked if either party had objections, Ethan shook his head. "No," he said. "I accept." Tori nodded once. "So do I." The room exhaled. Afterward, Ethan lingered while Tori gathered her things. "Is this really goodbye?" he asked. She paused, then answered honestly, "Yes." He swallowed. "I wish I'd understood sooner." "Understanding isn't the same as changing," she said. Outside, the air felt lighter. Tori walked down the courthouse steps alone, her posture steady, her stride unhurried. There was no victory speech waiting, no applause, no celebration, only space. Ethan watched from the doorway as she left. For the first time, he saw her clearly, not as someone who belonged to him, not as a background presence, but as a person who had outgrown the story he tried to trap her in. The realization was late, but it was complete. That night, Tori slept deeply, not because everything was over, but because nothing was unresolved. The final ruling came on a gray morning, unremarkable in every way, except one. It ended everything. Tori sat in the courtroom beside Daniel Wright, hands folded, posture composed. She didn't scan the room. She didn't search for Ethan's face. She had learned that anticipation gave power to outcomes that no longer needed it. Ethan arrived late. His suit was the same one he'd worn to earlier hearings, but it no longer fit the way it once had. Not physically, psychologically. He took his seat without meeting anyone's eyes, shoulders slightly rounded, confidence replaced by something thinner and quieter. When the judge entered the room, I stood. The ruling was read without embellishment. Asset redistribution. Restitution for misused marital funds. Legal costs assigned. Finalization of the divorce decree. Each sentence landed with calm inevitability, like stones placed deliberately rather than thrown. Tori listened without emotion, not because she felt nothing, but because the outcome no longer determined her worth. Ethan, however, felt every word. His attorney leaned in once, whispering something urgent, but Ethan barely responded. The battle was over. There was nothing left to contest. When the judge concluded, she looked at both of them evenly. "This court finds that the resolution reached reflects equity under the law," she said. "This matter is closed." The gavel struck. It was done. Outside, reporters lingered at a distance, sniffing for spectacle that never arrived. Daniel guided Tori past them without comment. "You okay?" he asked quietly once they reached the steps. "Yes," Tori replied. "Thank you." He nodded. "You handled this exactly right." Ethan exited moments later alone. No one approached him. No one asked questions. The absence of attention felt heavier than scrutiny. He watched Tori from afar as she walked away, her pace steady, her back straight. She didn't look back. That more than the ruling confirmed the loss. The consequences arrived quickly. Within days, accounts were adjusted, titles transferred, obligations enforced. The life Ethan had assumed was immovable shifted beneath him, exposing how much of it had rested on assumption rather than foundation. His employer placed him on leave, pending review. Standard procedure, they said. He knew better. Friends who once answered immediately began responding hours later, if at all. Invitations slowed, conversations shortened. The quiet that had once belonged to Tori now belonged to him. Madison never returned. Her absence wasn't dramatic, it was efficient. She removed herself the way she had attached herself when advantage disappeared. Ethan tried not to think about her. He failed. At night, he replayed moments he once dismissed Tori's silence, her calm, her refusal to engage. He had thought those things meant surrender. He understood now how wrong he'd been. Tori, meanwhile, settled into her new life without ceremony. She moved into a smaller place closer to the city, bright, uncluttered, intentionally temporary. The boxes were unpacked slowly, deliberately. Each item placed felt like a choice reclaimed. She reopened professional doors she'd once closed, gently, not out of desperation, but readiness. Conversations resumed where they had paused years earlier, not awkwardly, just honestly. "I took time off," she said simply when asked. No explanations, no apologies. The first check arrived quietly, then the second. Numbers on a page that confirmed not triumph, but independence. One afternoon, as she sorted mail, a letter arrived from Ethan. She didn't open it immediately. When she did, the words were careful, restrained, almost rehearsed. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I only want you to know I see it now. What I took for granted. What I lost." She folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Seeing wasn't the same as changing. And closure didn't require response. Weeks later, Margaret Perry reached out. "May I come by?" she asked. They met for coffee. Margaret looked older, somehow quieter, more reflective. "He's struggling," she said after a pause. Tori nodded. "I know." "I'm not asking you to fix anything," Margaret added quickly. "I just wanted you to know I'm proud of you." Tori met her eyes. "Thank you." That was enough. Ethan's downfall wasn't spectacular. There was no public disgrace, no dramatic collapse. There was just erosion. Position lost, influence diminished, a reputation that no longer protected him from scrutiny. He learned what it meant to be accountable in rooms where charm no longer worked. One evening, months later, he stood alone in the apartment he now rented, staring at a city skyline that felt indifferent to his presence. For the first time, he understood what Tori had felt for years. Invisible. And finally, honestly human. Tori didn't celebrate his losses. She didn't need to. Justice had done its work, not by elevating her over him, but by restoring balance where imbalance had lived too long. One morning, as sunlight filled her new space, she stood at the window and breathed deeply. There was no anger in her chest, no bitterness, only quiet certainty. The chapter had closed, and the woman who emerged from it belonged to herself. Life after justice didn't announce itself with relief. It unfolded slowly in ordinary moments that carried a new kind of weight, one that belonged entirely to Tori. The first thing she noticed was the silence. Not the oppressive silence of waiting or the hollow quiet of being ignored, but a clean, open stillness. The kind that didn't ask her to shrink or perform. The kind that let her breathe without permission. Her new apartment was modest but intentional. Large windows, neutral walls, nothing inherited from a life that wasn't hers anymore. Each morning, sunlight spilled across the floor, and with it came a reminder she no longer had to anticipate someone else's moods. She set her own schedule. She woke early, not out of anxiety, but a habit, and took long walks through the neighborhood. She noticed details she'd once overlooked: the rhythm of traffic, the way people moved when they weren't rushing to impress anyone, the quiet confidence of routines chosen rather than imposed. Work returned gradually, not with urgency, with curiosity. She reached out to former colleagues, not to explain, but to reconnect. Conversations picked up where they had paused years earlier, not burdened by apology or justification. "You disappeared," one of them said gently. "I stepped back," Tori replied. "I'm stepping forward now." That was enough. Her first project came through a week later, then another, then a longer-term contract that felt familiar, in the best way, challenging, demanding, aligned. She didn't rush to prove anything. She no longer needed validation to feel real. The court documents were finalized and filed away. Daniel checked in once more, professional as always. "You're clear," he said, "legally and otherwise." "Thank you," she replied. He paused. "You did most of the work." After the call ended, she sat for a moment, absorbing the truth of that statement. She had. Ethan's presence faded naturally, without effort. There were no more letters, no unexpected calls, no attempts at reconciliation. He existed now only as context, a chapter already archived. She heard about him indirectly. A former colleague mentioned he'd taken a step down. Another hinted at a quiet move out of the city. Nothing dramatic, nothing redemptive, just distance. Tori felt no satisfaction in it. Distance was simply what happened when lives stopped intersecting. Madison's name never came up again. That too felt appropriate. One afternoon, Tori stood in her kitchen phone, pressed to her ear, listening to her own voice as she negotiated a contract. Calm, firm, unapologetic. When the call ended, she realized something had shifted. She trusted herself again. Not in a loud, triumphant way, but in the quiet certainty that she could navigate complexity without disappearing inside it. That evening, she met a friend for dinner. Someone she hadn't seen in years. "You seem different," the friend said after a pause. Tori smiled faintly. "I'm not quieter. I'm clearer." The difference mattered. As weeks turned into months, she filled her time deliberately. She took a short trip alone. No agenda, no compromise, just movement and choice. She sat in unfamiliar cafes, watched strangers live their lives, and felt no urge to compare. For the first time, her life didn't feel paused. It felt intentional. One evening, while organizing paperwork, she came across an old photo. Her and Ethan years earlier, smiling for the camera. She studied it without flinching. She didn't tear it up. She placed it back in the folder and closed it gently. That woman hadn't been foolish. She had been hopeful. Hope, she understood now, wasn't a flaw. It just needed boundaries. Margaret Perry wrote once more a brief note. Polite, respectful, final. "I hope you're well. I wish you peace." Tori read it, then recycled the envelope. Peace wasn't something to wish anymore. It was something she practiced. The final tie severed itself on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. A clerk called to confirm a detail purely administrative. When the call ended, Tori set her phone down and realized there was nothing left to resolve. No loose ends, no unfinished conversations, no unanswered questions. That night, she cooked dinner for herself, music playing softly in the background. She ate slowly, savoring the simplicity of the moment. No tension, no waiting, no calculation, just presence. Later, she stood by the window, watching city lights flicker on one by one. Her reflection stared back, older, yes, but steadier. Less polished, more real. She thought about the woman she had been when silence felt like survival. She honored her. She thought about the woman she had become. She trusted her. Empowerment, she realized, wasn't about proving strength to others. It was about no longer needing to explain it. The past no longer reached for her. And the future didn't demand reassurance. It simply waited open, unthreatening hers. The life Tori built afterward did not arrive as a dramatic reinvention. It arrived as alignment. She stopped measuring her days by recovery and began measuring them by intention. Morning light through the windows. Work that challenged her without consuming her. Evenings that belonged to no one but herself. There was no urgency to fill space anymore. Space itself had become a form of peace. She didn't announce her independence. She lived it. When people asked about the divorce, she answered simply. It ended. No backstory, no performance. She had learned that closure didn't require explanation, only acceptance. Her career settled into a rhythm that felt earned. Projects came because of her work, not her proximity to anyone else's name. Meetings felt different now, less defensive, more direct. She spoke when she had something to say. She stopped filling silence to make others comfortable. Silence reclaimed was powerful. One afternoon, a former colleague asked her how she'd managed the transition so calmly. "I didn't rush the ending," Tori replied. "I prepared for it." That preparation showed up everywhere. In how she negotiated, in how she set boundaries, in how she chose rest without guilt. There were moments, quiet ones, when the past tried to echo. A familiar street, a song she used to avoid, a memory that surfaced without warning. She let them pass. Healing, she understood now, wasn't about erasing memory. It was about removing its authority. Months later, she ran into Ethan by chance. It happened in a crowded bookstore downtown, the kind of place she'd started visiting often. She recognized him before he saw her. He looked thinner, quieter, less certain. When their eyes met, neither of them smiled. "Hi," he said. "Hello," she replied. A pause followed awkward, human brief. "You look well," he said, as if the words surprised him. "I am," she replied. And she meant it. He nodded. "I'm trying." She didn't ask how. She didn't offer encouragement or judgment. "That's good," she said. They stood there for a moment, two people who once shared a life now connected only by history. There was nothing left to resolve. No apologies to accept. No anger to release. "I won't keep you," he said finally. She inclined her head. "Take care." And that was it. She walked away without looking back, not because she was proving anything, but because there was nothing left behind her that required attention. Later that evening, she thought about the woman she had been at the beginning of the story. The one who mistook endurance for loyalty. The one who believed silence was safer than truth. She felt no shame for her. That woman had done what she needed to survive. This woman did what she needed to live. Tori began volunteering her time quietly, intentionally. Not to save anyone, not to rewrite the past, but to stand in rooms where people were still learning what power looked like without noise. She didn't give speeches. She listened. And when she spoke, it was with clarity that didn't seek approval. One night, she hosted a small dinner at her place. Friends, colleagues, laughter that didn't feel borrowed. As the evening wound down, someone raised a glass and said, "To new beginnings." Tori smiled, then corrected gently, "To choosing ourselves." The toast landed. It stayed. When the apartment finally quieted, she cleaned up alone, humming softly. She stood by the sink, hands in warm water, and felt a deep, steady contentment settle in her chest. Not happiness in the explosive sense. Stability. She turned off the lights and moved through her space with ease. Every corner felt familiar. Every object had a purpose. Nothing asked her to be smaller. Before bed, she opened her journal and wrote a single line. "Power doesn't need permission." She closed the book and rested. There were no more chapters to outrun. No endings to brace for. Only a life that fit. And in that life, Tori Perry was no longer quiet because she was afraid to speak. She was quiet because she didn't need to explain her strength. Some betrayals don't end with shouting. They end with clarity. Tori's story isn't about revenge. It's about precision. About the difference between reacting and preparing. About understanding that silence can be a strategy, not a surrender when it's chosen with intention. In real life, not everyone gets a dramatic apology. Not every truth is acknowledged out loud. And not every ending arrives with closure wrapped in kindness. But justice doesn't always need noise to be complete. Sometimes it arrives when you stop arguing with someone who's already shown you who they are and start aligning your life with what you deserve. If you've ever felt invisible, underestimated, or dismissed because you stayed calm while others were loud, remember this strength doesn't have a single volume. It has direction. And when you move with direction quietly, deliberately, you don't just escape what hurt you. You build something better in its place. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And if you believe in stories about justice, growth, and quiet power, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next one.